Hey everybody, welcome back to Chapter and Converse. This is part 2 of my August rewind. So if you haven't seen part 1, I will link it for you down below. But as I talked about in that video, I wound up reading 9 books. I finished the 9th one on September 1st, but I'm counting it. And I can talk a lot when I want to talk about books, especially, not even if it's books that I love. Even if it's a book I don't love, I will still talk a lot about it. So I broke this up into 2 parts. This is going to be part 2. I did Thriller-a-thon, which is where I read a bulk of the books for the month. It wasn't my best reading month before that, but that's not to say that I didn't read good books in the not good part of the month, because I did. So if you haven't seen part 1, check that out. If you have, hunker down and let's do part 2. Let's jump in with the final Gillian Flynn book that I had to read, which is Dark Places. And I mostly totally listened to this on audiobook. I would say I read a little bit here and there, but mostly did the audiobook of this. And I had said in my Thriller-a-thon vlog, and I feel like this might have come out harsher than I intended it to be, this was my least favorite of all of her books, but is not to say that it wasn't a good book. I think some stories you connect with better than others, and some characters you connect with better than others. And I just had a hard time connecting with Libby. And like I said before in my other video, it's not so much that I connect with Gillian Flynn's characters in that I can relate to them or I have similar experiences that they have. They are all pretty heinously unlikable people. But there's always something about them that I find I can understand or I'm interested in or I'm like compelled to flip forward. And I struggled a bit with the characters in this book. So it's Libby, it is her mom, and then it is her brother, it's awful, Ben, I want to say. Yeah, Ben. So we get 3 different perspectives. So we get Libby's perspective in the present day. And then the core of the story is Libby's mom and 2 older sisters were brutally massacred. I've said this so many times before, but I mean like heinously, horribly killed. And it's described on the page. When she was a child and she was home, but she winds up escaping. And her older brother Ben winds up going to jail for the crime, mostly based on Libby's testimony that he did it. And she was very young, and then now she is, I want to say in her 30s. I feel like we're like 25 years later, and she has basically been living this pretty horrible life. So she wound up going to live with her aunt, and she's just messed up in all the Gillian Flynn ways that a person can be messed up. And she lives in this small town still. It's in Missouri. And basically, as a child, people were donating money to her to sort of this like Save Libby Day, that's her name, Libby Day fund. And when she was 18, she sort of inherited like $300,000. And she's basically run through that money. She's dealing with, I don't know if he's like an attorney or, I don't know, it doesn't even matter. But basically comes to find out that she really doesn't have any money. She's got no skills. She's got no job. She doesn't want to have to go get a job. And as fate would have it, there's kind of like this Real Murders Club who is obsessed with, you know, amongst other things, you know, like John Bonet and Lacey Peterson and stuff. They're obsessed with the Libby Day murders and the Day family murders. And they come to her because there's a whole group of people today and way back in the day, no puns intended here, who don't believe that her brother Ben is the murderer. And this club basically offers Libby money to come and meet with them, to talk to them, to do appearances, to sell any personal mementos that she still has from her family, which she does because she's a horrible, messed up human being and she's desperate for cash. But what also winds up happening is Libby is forced to literally sort of open the Pandora's box of what happened all those years ago and confront things that she hasn't thought about in a long time or sort of second guess what she thinks happened that night, because here are all these people presenting evidence to her about what they think really happened and why they don't think her brother is guilty. And she starts to just question everything. But meanwhile, her brother is in jail and he says he deserves to be there. So kind of what's happening? So we see, like I said, Libby in the present day, and then we see her brother Ben and her mother in the days leading up to the murder. So you get to see everything that happened in those moments up to and through the murder. It's pretty gross. It's pretty bad. I've got, I can handle a lot of stuff, but I still can squeam at some stuff. So a couple of things that I didn't love, again, like I didn't feel like I connected with any of the characters in any way. And I felt like it was very long at the beginning. I felt like there was a lot of like backstory info dump happening at the beginning. And I felt like I was slogging a little bit at the beginning of the story. Whereas in her other books, I felt like I was kind of like immediately hooked and just wanted to know what would happen. So eventually I did hit that point in this book, and then it went very quickly, but I feel like we could have lost like 75 or 100 pages out of this book easily and kind of been more succinct and not had kind of all this other stuff going on. And then there was like a theory about Ben, and I'm not going to give anything away, but like I just wasn't like down with that part of the book and sort of the theory on things. And there was some of the violence that I wasn't completely like okay with. Not that I know that you're ever okay with the violence, but like that I don't know if it added to the story or it added to, I don't know. There were just parts of it that I just didn't like. It's the best way I can describe it. So it's one of these things where like, there's some people, this is their favorite book of hers. It's so subjective. I think if you're a fan of hers, absolutely read it. There is some great lines to it. There's some great story to it. There's some great grit and ugliness and just classic Gillian Flynn that I love. I also think, I'll be totally honest, I think I was partially disconnected because I was listening to it. And this is something I still struggle with audiobooks, where I think there are certain books that are good on audio, and there are certain books where I need to be reading the book because I would follow along differently. And I feel like maybe I missed some nuances to this book also. So there might be a day where I go back and read it. We'll see. It's not like I'm unhauling it or anything like that, but I enjoyed it. I'm glad I read it. It was one of the old ones on my TBR. I have finally finished all Gillian Flynn's. Now I can talk about her in a spotlighty kind of video. But yes, that was Dark Places. Oh, and I'm also going to watch the movie with Charlize Theron because I'm just super curious to see how it holds up. And to round out one of the unintentional things that I did during Thrillerathon, which is to read books about horrible things that happened to people when they were children and forcing them in the present day to question everything they thought they knew, I listened to The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. And Girls Like Us had Nell, Nell's mother was murdered when she was 7 years old, and she wound up giving her dad an alibi for that night and then starts to question herself. Dark Places. Libby Day, family is murdered while she's home. She escapes it, says her brother did it. And in The Good Daughter, we have Sam and Charlie, who are sisters. And when they are teenagers, these masked men come to their house in search of her father, Rusty, or their father, Rusty, who isn't home. And it's just them and their mom. And it ends horribly for this family when these two men show up at their house. And we fast forward, I want to say Charlie is like 12 or 13 when the book opens, and then she's 41 when we fast forward. And something happens in the present day where she is very much in the wrong place at the wrong time and pulled into a police investigation. And it eventually forces her to go back to what happened that day when she was a child and sort of relive it and confront it and the secrets that she and her father kept come out and how it affects everything. So I had no intention, not even realizing that I was kind of following this theme, but I was. And to talk about The Good Daughter, so this is the first Karen Slaughter book I have read. Again, what am I doing? If you watch part one, I hadn't read Hank Phillippi Ryan before either. I don't know what I'm waiting for, but these authors who have a whole bunch of books. But Karen Slaughter, again, she is another author who I have followed, seen at conferences, read interviews by her, have been intrigued by her books, but just never picked one up. And Pretty Girls is on my shelf, and I just haven't read it. And one reason I hadn't is because I heard a lot about how gritty and dark Karen Slaughter's writing can be. And she does not shy away from violence on the page in all aspects. She does not shy away from anything grisly. She doesn't shy away from bullying, racism, homophobia, language, just anything. She puts it all out there. And the writer in me applauds her 10 times over for her authenticity, for going there, for just writing what she wants to write and writing the ugliness of the world and not sugarcoating everything. But the slightly squeamish part of me is like, ooh, I don't know if I can read this. So I put it off for those reasons, but I listened to The Good Daughter. And this is a case of an audiobook where I was so engrossed in this book that I actually would just sort of like sit and listen. And a lot of times when I'm listening to an audiobook, I'm multitasking, which is part of why I'm checked out on things. But I literally sat and listened to The Good Daughter, and I was blown away in so many different ways. So she did not disappoint. I felt like the expectations of her writing were just dead on. It was uncomfortable at times. It was cringy at times. It was heartbreaking at times. And I said this in my vlog. I finally figured out the first scene/chapter of The Good Daughter, not in content, but in tension, in discomfort, in wanting to cover my eyes and ears, but like needing to understand the reality of the situation, was exactly like when I read A Time to Kill by John Grisham. And it is a scene that sets the tone and sort of for the entire book. And it is horrible to get through, but you need to. And what really surprised me also, I would say, about The Good Daughter is I expected there's a crime that takes place in the past, there's a crime that takes place in the present. Charlie is an attorney, her dad is an attorney. There's obviously police investigation, FBI is there. I expected this to be, there's trial, like Rusty is representing someone from the current case. I very much expected this to be investigation, police procedural, courtroom kind of a thing. And it's really not. So there is some investigation about what's happening that Charlie takes upon herself and, you know, kind of with her dad. But at the same time, this is very much a story about family and these characters. And it is about Rusty and his wife. You know, we learn a lot about Gemma in the past and in, you know, through his stories and through people that knew her and Charlie's memories of her. And it is about Charlie and her sister Sam and sort of Charlie's regrets about that day and things that she hasn't forgiven herself for. And obviously, you know, fathers and daughters, and then husbands and wives, friendships, relationships, divorce, so many. I don't know how to talk about it without risking spoiling anything, but it was so much more heartfelt in so many ways than I was expecting it to be. And I will say that Karen Slaughter writes some beautiful characters, complex, complicated, you know, don't always make good choices, don't always say the right things, don't always do the right things, but so real and authentic in so many ways. And then there is sort of this dark underlying humor in a lot of scenes, which I feel like if you listen to any police officer or investigator or anyone who deals with anything really tragic in emergency services or anything like that, they will talk about how there is levity sort of at the crime scene and at these weird moments because that's how people get through it. So I feel like a lot of times when you're reading these very gritty thrillers, there is a levity to it in that way and sort of a dark humory way because that's how people get through things. And I was just really surprised, like I said, about sort of like the emotional tug of this book. And I really enjoyed it. It's really long. It's like 500 something pages. It was like an 18-hour audiobook or something like that, but it was so well done. The story was so well done. I was totally invested. I mean, like, I was heartbroken at moments. I was hopeful at moments. I was cringing out of my skin at moments. It definitely has triggers of every horrible thing you can possibly imagine in it. So if you have any sort of hesitation about being able to listen to or read that kind of a thing, this might not be the book for you. This is definitely like a hardcore kind of a book. But if it is your kind of thing, I say that loosely, but you know what I mean. It is so worth the read. It is so well done. I'm glad I did it. I am going to read Pretty Girls. I'm just gonna palate cleanse a little bit. This is not a book I could listen to before I went to bed at night, that's for sure, because there was a lot of darkness to it that I just didn't want to completely take into me right before I closed my eyes at night. But I get why people love Karen Slaughter. it was just great. It was a really, really good book. It was a really good story. It surprised me in a lot of really good ways. I was satisfied with the ending. And I love Rusty. I really do. I just do. He was so good. I love Charlie as well, but I really love Rusty as a character, as a dad, as a man, his relationship with his daughter. And again, he is flawed in all sorts of ways and does not always do the right thing. But all in, I just thought he was just such a great character. The next book I read, which is a little lighter than The Good Daughter, is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. And I'm so excited that I read this one too. This was the newest book I got, super anticipated. All the way back in January, I was excited about this book. You guys know I'm a big Ruth Ware fan. I've read all of her books, and my favorite of her books is In a Dark, Dark Wood, which is her first one. And I will say this is probably right up there as a favorite. And I just thought it was so good. I thought it was so well done. I definitely feel like Ruth Ware is hitting a groove, is finding her, not her voice per se, but sort of like finding stories that suit her writing, if that makes sense. So there is kind of this like creepy gothic-ishness to it, sort of kind of like The Death of Mrs. Westaway, where they had like the old house and all of that. And in this, there's sort of that similar gothic dark vibe to it, but also a very smart mystery and sort of interesting themes about like surveillance and paranoia and, sort of, is it supernatural or are people sort of superly horrible? So this is a book about a woman named Rowan, who is a nanny who takes this job at kind of this mansion home in the Scottish Highlands. And it's this old home that was purchased by these two architects, this married couple, and they have retrofitted and redone the entire house to be a smart house. So basically your phone controls everything from the locks on the doors to the temperature to the lights to the window shades. There are speakers everywhere. There's cameras throughout the house. And Rowan takes on the job to nanny these 3 young girls. And then there's a 4th daughter who's off at boarding school who does come back. But the core of it is these 3 younger girls that she's nannying for. And the book opens with Rowan writing letters to solicitors to find someone to represent her because she's in jail, and she swears, and it's kind of like, quote, like, I didn't kill that child. So from the get-go, we know one of the children is dead, Rowan's in jail for it, and she swears she didn't do it. But what actually happened? And the story is told in letter format to the solicitor, explaining the entire story from when she sort of saw the ad for the position through to what happens the night in question, so to speak. And what we see is sort of Rowan's gradual unraveling through things that are happening in the house, things that are happening to her. And there's a lot of things that are messed up about this book, but what's messed up about this book, kind of from a premise, is Rowan gets there and then the parents have to go to a conference. And again, they're architects, they own a firm together, they have tons of clients, and they wind up leaving her basically alone after 24 hours with these 3 children. And then there's like a housekeeper who comes and goes, and then there's kind of a groundskeeper, jack of all trades guy, conveniently named Jack, even though I couldn't remember his name last time. And we start to see sort of Rowan question everything, including herself. We see these children who, for the most part, are kind of horrible people. And then we see this friendship develop with Jack. And I talked about this in my other video too. It reminded me sort of conceptually of Nick and Offred from The Handmaid's Tale, but there's no Handmaid's vibes to this, but just sort of like that friendship developing, and sort of they're both sort of the help, and how they help each other kind of deal with things that are happening at the house. So I was completely invested. I read it very quickly. I felt like it was a very tight, succinct story. And I don't know if it was the style of the letter format that made it go quicker, or if it was just because we were sort of living Rowan's perspective. It felt it felt like, I mean, obviously it's first person, but something about it felt even more intimate to me, if that makes any kind of sense. But I felt like it just went really quickly. It unfolded very naturally. I didn't feel like there was any excess stuff, and maybe I'm still scarred from dark places. But I thought it was really well done. I liked the ending. There were some good twists and reveals that happened in this. And I thought it was great. I think she did a great job. I am continuing to be a fan of Ruth Ware. It is, it's just great. I would say if you haven't read her, pick it up. If you've read her but maybe didn't connect with some of her other stories and are concerned about it, it's a good one. It's really, really good, you guys. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was just fantastic. The last book I read is Lying in Wait by Liz Nugent, and this was on my Thriller-a-thon TBR for the creepiest cover, because I thought this was pretty creepy. But I didn't get to it in time, but I did read it at the end of the month. And this is the first Liz Nugent that I have read. A lot of first-time authors for me here. I also have her book Unraveling Oliver, which I've heard great things about. But I was very intrigued by this book, and the first line of this book is kind of like what sold it to me, on top of the fact that people that I love and follow on Booktube recommended it. I am so jumbled today. I'm sorry, you guys. So the first line of this book is, "My husband did not mean to kill Annie Doyle, but the lying tramp deserved it." How great of a first line of a book is that? Off to the races, right? I just was like, I'm in. This is going to be great. This is going to be like fast and messed up, and why did they kill her in the first place, and how are they going to get away with it, and there's going to be police investigation, and I was just like, yes, I was like, hunker down for the ride. And well, at the end of the day, I very much enjoyed this book. I will say my expectations were not in line with what it was, in the sense that it was a very slow burn, in my opinion, and it was a very character-driven story in that, well, I know we know the whodunit out of the gate, but in The Turn of the Key, we know like who didn't done it. Like we know that Rowan's like, somebody's dead, but I didn't do it. I thought that this was going to be sort of this sort of flashback, what led up to it, what was happening, and for no good reason. That's just sort of what I thought. And what we wind up actually getting is 3 different perspectives. So Lydia is the wife. Her husband is the one who killed Annie Doyle. We get the perspective of her son, Lawrence, who is in high school at the time that it happened. And then we get the perspective of Karen, who is sisters with Annie. And we start in 1980, and then eventually we jump to 1985, and we see sort of how Annie's death has affected both of these families and these people who are involved. So I enjoyed it, but again, I had a hard time getting into it. I felt like the beginning was slow. I wanted more kind of like action out of the gate, because I felt like we sort of like started with like a pow, and then sort of like slowed down a little bit. And I wanted just like pow, pow, pow. I just wanted like fast-paced stuff. But once I would say, after like the first third of the book, I feel like it very much took off, and like things started to happen, and things started to reveal, and things started to connect, and we sort of took off for quite a bit. And I felt like the beginning, kind of like with Dark Places, I felt like I was bogged down a bit in some backstory and in some stuff that like I didn't need to know it all, or I didn't need to know it all then, or I just didn't need like info dumps. And it's not even that long of a book. It's like 310 pages, maybe something like that. But ultimately, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed where it went. I very much enjoyed the ending. This is another one that's tricky to talk about because I don't want to give anything away. There is some definite darkness. There is some definite messed upness that happens in this book. There are some people who are not good. Obviously, they killed a girl and covered it up. So there's a lot to it. So it definitely was sort of like a slow, dark burn. So less like mystery thriller in that sense, but it really is about how Annie's death / murder affects the families, and it affects their relationships with one another, how they view one another, what they think, sort of misconceptions they have about things, misunderstandings about things, and God, this is so hard to talk about without saying anything. I liked it. I feel like I'm making it sound like I didn't like it, but I didn't love it, I would say. So like I enjoyed her writing. But it's not a book, like I didn't dog ear anything in it, which I know is not important. But it's kind of like a different, I think I was in like fast-paced thriller mode, emotionally driven thriller mode, that this felt very much like I pumped the brakes and I was looking to continue in the fast lane, I guess I would say. But I liked it. I'm very curious about Unraveling Oliver. I've heard mixed things about that too. So this was good. It just took me a bit to get into it. I felt very satisfied with the end of it. And like I said, I read the end of it very quickly. The second two-thirds, or the last two-thirds of it went very, very quickly for me. I just feel like I got kind of my expectations wrong at the beginning, and that I just felt a little heavy bogged down in the beginning. Like I just wanted the story to get moving, and I felt like it took a bit for the story to get moving. But once it did, it was really good. So hopefully that gives you some sort of insight to it. So that does it for part 2, everything I read in August. And it was a good reading month. So I was happy to get to a lot of books that I had had on my radar and on my list. And I'm gonna kind of like carry through, and my goal is to read all of the books that were on my TBR for Thrillerathon. And I'm actually reading The Naturals right now. And then the last book I have is Don't Look Back. Isn't that awful? Never Look Back by Alison Galen. So I plan to pick that up in September too. I was having a really hard time figuring out what I wanted to read in September, or sort of what I wanted to read next. So I figured, let me continue with this list, and then The Testaments by Margaret Atwood is happening. The minute Amazon drops it on my doorstep, I'm dropping everything else, and we will just see what happens from there. But thank you guys, as always, for watching and hanging out with me today, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one, guys. Bye.